Hello, and welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And it is officially post-Oscars. The whole buzz is done. We're finally free from the nonsense that was the Oscars. It's over. It's all over. And Green Book won. I am not shocked.
No surprises there. No shocking upset. My personal horse in the race, Ralph Breaks the Internet, did not win Best Picture.
God, I mean, you know what? Come on. If you're gonna get something in there, it's got to be Ralph Breaks the Internet. Let's go, Oscars. And like, I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna put an animated feature from last year into actual Best Picture category, don't you touch fucking Spider-Verse. No.
It could be none other than Ralph Breaks the Internet.
That is the only correct solution here. Let's just be honest with ourselves. But we're not here to talk about Green Book or Ralph Breaks the Internet. We're here to talk about the guy who won the Best Director, the Best Foreign Language Film, Best Cinematography, I believe. We're here to talk about Roma, a movie that is pretty far from our wheelhouse. We're kind of going on a spree of discussing movies that really don't have anything to do with two white guys. And also, this one has nothing to do with the usual genre of movie we watch whatsoever.
This one's a straight up drama. Could not be more drama.
Like an art house drama.
Yeah, and like this, pretty far removed from what we normally talk about on Beating a Dead Horse and screaming about the proper pronunciation of Thanos.
Oh man, I'm terrified that I'm going to mispronounce something here. And like, the problem here though too is if I mispronounce something, it's not a fake mythical beast. Here it's like someone's livelihood.
Well, on the bright side, I think our audience is far less likely to be able to correct you, so no one will know. God will know.
God will know, and I will pay for my sins one day. Don't worry.
Yeah. So Roma. You know what? I guess since we're jumping off Oscar discussion, when I saw, because I never watch them, I just always go and see the nominees and see who won, because say what you will about the award show itself, like looking at the nominees is at least a good way to watch films that might have slipped under your radar you might not have known about, which
it's
indeed
also fun
is
to spark debate.
Yeah, it's good conversation. I'm glad the Oscars exist, if nothing else. And indeed, that's the case this week. I saw that Alfonso Cuarón had a movie on Netflix that I didn't know about, and it seemed relevant to the podcast based on the summary, so fuck it, let's do it. And you know what? I think that, like, so Green Book aside, and your feelings on that, I'll say this. I found it sort of interesting and strange that this movie won Best Director, but it didn't win Best Picture. And having seen it now, I think I get it. Because Best Director is a weird category in Oscardom, because usually it's just whatever wins Best Picture also wins Best Director, even if, like, it's not necessarily the best directed film, or, like, in certain cases, it's a lot like a consolation prize of, hey, you didn't win Best Picture, but here, we'll throw the director a bone because this was the closest competitor. Like, that's how it works sometimes, which is, I thought would be the case here. But now I'm wondering, because of the films, just in general, that came out last year and that were, like, up for Oscars, Roma was not my favorite, but I think that it probably is the best directed, and I think it's very appropriate that it won that. There's a lot of beautiful shots. There's a lot of great tension, like, made in the story just through the visual language alone. Yeah, and so even though, like, if I'm talking about my emotional reaction to the film, I wasn't always super invested. There were times where I think it was maybe moving a little too slow and started to lose me. Not terribly so, but it definitely is one of those movies that is more of a slow burn and is kind of takes its time until it really explodes into kind of a more dramatic sort of climax. The journey was well worth it though, and the cinematography and filmmaking techniques on display made the experience getting there an entertaining one at times, a like poignant one at other times. There's a lot of nice little subtleties in there. And I think overall it pulls it off. It pulls off that fine line of capturing sort of being a film that's more about the mundane aspects of life with this undercurrent of sort of dramatic state violence, among other things, and while still like being interesting, because slow paced and tense can be a fine line to ride without crossing over into boring. And I'll admit, like, maybe this is outing me as some kind of dumb. I was bored at times, but again, overall, I think the film was very excellent, very well directed, and we'll talk in more detail about like what areas were working particularly well in that regard, and just very, very much worth watching, especially when you do get to the more emotional, like high intensity stuff in the latter half of the film.
So before I talk about like my impressions of the film and whatnot, I just out of curiosity, I looked up the past 5 years to see who won Best Director versus Best Picture, or Best Picture. And in the past 5 years, only 2 directors have won both Best Picture and Best Director, and that is Birdman and The Shape of Water. So it's actually a pretty surprising split on all of these. I will say, apologies to Alfonso Cuarón, I suppose. This is the second time that he has won Best Director but not Best Picture. In 2013, he won Best Director for Gravity, which was also up for Best Picture, but it instead went to 12 Years a Slave. So, sorry, buddy.
That's interesting. You know what? Something tells me that Alfonso Cuarón's just fine with his 2 Oscars.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I'm not like, ooh, this has to hurt. Like, I mean, Best Director's Best Director. Let's not beat around the bush here.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, I haven't seen Gravity, but of the Alfonso Cuarón movies I have seen, most notably Children of Men, I think that there's also kind of a weird, not a weird, but like thinking about that movie and this movie, Alfonso Cuarón is very obviously like has an interest in birth and sort of themes surrounding that. So I think that, despite being like completely different movies on their face, like watching Children of Men as a like companion piece to this might be interesting to do if you're so inclined to, you know, do weird little movie watching games like that. I highly recommend Children of Men anyway, because it's a great movie. But yeah, so having seen Children of Men, it makes a lot of sense to me that his movies would keep winning him Best Director but not Best Picture, because the stories of the movies are good, obviously. Like they're emotionally resonant and have like themes and a real like creative spark. But I never saw Gravity, and honestly, like what people had said about Gravity is one of the reasons I didn't feel as inclined to seek it out, is that people were saying that the story of Gravity is like a pretty basic thriller, but the directing is what makes it really worth watching. And you know, I'm more of a story man. Like I one of the categories I always keep a closer eye on is like the best screenplay awards. And so while I appreciate like good directing and good cinematography, because obviously that's vital in a visual medium, but when I hear comments like that, I'm dissuaded a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if like the voters of the Academy are full of kind of wishy-washy fucks like me, who are like, oh wow, like this dude is like a master of visual storytelling, but I wasn't as into the story as I was in this other thing, so I'm gonna vote for that.
I wasn't as into it as I was in Green Book. Fuck you. No, I haven't seen Gravity myself, and I feel like I really should now, hearing Jackson talk about it like that, because I feel like it's probably up my alley in ways that I didn't give it enough credit for when it came out. But no, barring all that, I'm going to talk about Roma for a hot second, because I pretty much agree with Jackson in every regard here. It's a very good movie. It's very interesting. The cinematography is wonderful. I found myself constantly kind of like, oh, wow, that's a really kind of clever, interesting shot. They're doing some really cool stuff here. It plays with like the expectations on how scenes work, and like, you know, a long shot on something like this happening implies one thing and it might not actually pay off. And like, it's a very intentional, deliberate movie. But deliberate a lot of times also does translate to very slow, very long, lingering shots, which I use the term deliberate very intentionally, because it's intentionally slow in these places. This is not a failing of the movie. It's doing exactly what it wants to do, but it can be draining on the audience, I suppose, where like you're just kind of like, all right, let's move forward a little bit. However, in connection with what the movie is, it makes a lot of sense. The movie is based on Alfonso Cuarón's own life as a young child in Mexico, born to a middle-class family with their own live-in maids, and it was his tale watching things happen around him, and so to just kind of have long lingering shots of just kind of like, this is what's happening today, it makes a lot of sense. As I said though, like not everything needs to be translated in that way, and so sometimes it can be a little frustrating to see, despite being just an absolute masterclass and incredible to watch from a cinematography standpoint.
Yeah, like there are a lot of really interesting choices and shots that are sticking out of my mind, and there's one in particular, no spoilers, but a few weeks ago we called for Hollywood to show more dong. We wanted them to hang dong, and our prayers have been answered. There is a full frontal extended sequence of a man with his flaccid dong flopping around, and you know what, like, it's kind of a weird and jarring scene at first because you're not prepared for it, and like a little bit funny because at first it's just like, there's male nudity. That in and of itself, again, is something you don't see. And then, again, without any spoilers, he starts doing this like kendo.
Look, if you've seen the Star Wars Kid video,
yeah, no,
it's what it immediately reminded me of, except fully nude.
Imagine the Star Wars Kid's floppy penis dangling around in that video.
Don't. If you like, you should replace the Star Wars Kid with a very well-built man with a very floppy penis dangling around as he's spinning a sword.
And I'll tell you what, that scene becomes, like, with the benefit of context later on, becomes very like thematically relevant. So kudos to that. But yeah, there's a lot of little moments. Is that I say that the first half was a lot slower, but I can think of great, poignant, interesting little moments that kept happening.
The problem is that they're punctuated by like 30 seconds of nothing on either side. Like, the moments when they hit hard, and they're very memorable. And like, once again, I'm not trying to say that these 30 seconds of space on either side diminish the impact of the movie. It's just very easy to kind of lose focus in these points, which arguably is what heightens the moments when they happen.
That is true. I will say that with one last, again, I think we're brushing up on the limits of not spoilers here. But one last sort of glib critique that came from Haley this week, a nice little line she had that made me laugh, is that she said that her impression of the movie was basically along what we've been saying, but she specifically said that the amount of panning shots of people just kind of walking down the street. She noticed that there were a lot of them, and so after the movie was over, after the credits rolled, she had turned to me and said that it felt like some story had been removed to include more walking.
And like, there's some definite truth to that. Like, it does feel that way, but I do want to just kind of bounce back to give credit to the film and not to discredit Haley. Like, that's a very true statement. But like, keeping in mind that it feels like Alfonso Cuarón himself is in the scene, it makes sense to have like long panning shots. It feels like he's part of it, witnessing things like these are his memories put to film.
Yeah, that sort of distance, because I did no research on the movie before watching it. I just heard that it was good and wanted to see what it was about. So that makes a lot of sense with that context, that there's perhaps like you kind of get the sense that maybe some of this is autobiographical in one way or another, but maybe like as a viewer I perhaps wasn't sure like what perspective the director would be coming from these kind of experiences from. So it's interesting that like I would be interested to watch this again with that context of this idea of like the distance of the child observer. I mean, like you know if this is the kind of movie that you can get into, if long shots of people walking, slow burns with sort of like subtle like held back drama are your game, like you like artier dramas that don't
historical dramas.
Yeah, I mean, you probably already know about this movie and have probably already seen it. So this to those of you who like might not have known, this definitely gets my recommendation. With the big old caveat that if you cannot handle like slow burns, if you want
fall asleep
like,
during the beginning of Alien,
that's a pretty good metric. I was about to say, like, if you listened to one of our episodes about finger quotes boring sci-fi and we're like screaming at Sean like, what are you talking about? Like, I can't tolerate 20 minutes of apes at the beginning of the movie. Probably isn't the movie for you.
Oh god, that's my fucking brand, isn't it? 20 minutes of apes at the beginning of movies. Fuck.
That's a pretty decent metric actually for any. I think that says a lot about any particular viewer. It's a good litmus test. Like, how do you feel about the 20 minutes of apes at the beginning of 2001?
And like the ballets happening throughout the movie. If you're like, fuck, just get on to the science fiction stuff. 2001 is a fucking masterpiece. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. So like
2001 is a fucking masterpiece. I agree with that. So, spoilers?
Yeah, before we do, as always, we're going to start talking about what we got coming up next week, which is, oh boy, just all sorts of our shit. Because we're going to be talking about Alita Battle Angel next week. So like, don't worry, we're done with all like the pretentious art things and like talking about deep movie, like Black Klansman, Roma, like all those movies with like serious plots and themes and like heavy tones. No, we're talking about an adaptation of a manga that shaped a lot of science fiction. So that's what we're back to, baby.
Don't worry, everyone. We're going to stop pretending to be real critics. We're bringing you back with that weeb shit next week.
Now that we're in spoilers, I want to kind of dive back really quick to talk about Alfonso Cuarón as kind of like the camera and kind of like the lens through which everything is seen. Because I remember there's one scene in particular that, like, as I was watching the movie, I quickly Googled it just to try and see if I could get any context or try and understand better what was happening. And specifically, it occurs about midway through, a little bit later, when the entire forest is on fire. And a man dressed in a Krampus suit walks out, takes the mask off, and just starts singing. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Like, is there a context to this song? Because the song is the one thing that isn't subtitled. And so, like, I'm like, let me figure out what this song is. Should I know what this song is? Let me Google this, see what I can find out. And so I was kind of Googling around, and I didn't necessarily find anything concrete, but I did find a really interesting interpretation on Reddit. So take this with a grain of salt. But I think it's a very cool, interesting interpretation of the scene in that the man walking out in the Krampus suit and singing is what Alfonso Cuarón remembers from that night. It's not necessarily anything truly symbolic, but like memory picks out weird things that happen. And like just remembering that you had a weird uncle come out in a Krampus suit and sing while the forest burned is the type of thing that you would remember as an adult. You wouldn't know why, but it's weird. It stands out in your memory. And so it felt pertinent to fit in. And as I said, I don't know how accurate that is of an interpretation, but I think it's a really interesting one, and I really like it.
That makes a lot of sense, because Haley and I were talking about the Krampus singing and how, like, so on the one hand, if you're talking about, like, adding to, like, the themes and motifs of the movie, the image of, like, everyone desperately trying to hold back this fire on, like, New Year's Eve really plays well with this sort of looming threat of death and violence that's just hanging around in every scene, even when it's being about kind of a mundane middle-class family. And then you have the Krampus start singing, and it's pretty inexplicable. Like, we both turned to each other and were kind of like, what the fuck is going on? But, you know, I guess to, not that I have any particular insight into what he was thinking, but to corroborate kind of this interpretation, in my novel manuscript, I went out and set out to include a bunch of things that happened in my hometown that were kind of weird, that when I tell people about, they never really believe. And
Cash Money Gang.
The Cash Money Gang. So like I went out of my way to include that, and the only difference perhaps between my method and Alfonso Cuarón's method is that I looked at these memories or these true stories that I had been told, and I ended up deleting them from the book because they were just too absurd, and I figured that nobody would ever believe this actually happened. You know, truth is stranger than fiction. The difference is that Alfonso Cuarón, which I guess makes him a bolder artist than me, just looked at the man in the Krampus suit singing and said, you know what? This actually happened. Fuck all y'all if you try to criticize me for it. I'm putting it in. And then he did. So you know what? I really respect that, because you're right. That is absolutely the sort of detail that he could not have possibly just made up. Like, he had to have seen, like, that had to have been a very vivid flashpoint memory for him to see this man in a Krampus suit or something singing as the flames like tower over the woods. Yeah, I fully buy this interpretation. I don't doubt it for a second. This is truth in my mind now.
Yeah, as I said, like, no idea how accurate it is, like, without, like, a directorial confirmation. We never really will, but it's a very interesting and really cool interpretation of it. Like, as Jack says, like, it's absolutely the truth in my mind, and inevitably when I forget this half of the conversation, just like, this is what happened a year down the road, it's what will be forever.
It'll turn into a game of telephone. Hey, do you remember, like, apparently the director had said that he put on a Krampus suit and, like, sang and danced as his family burned.
Oh fuck.
But you know what? I'll tell you what. I'll give you a few movies that this reminded me of in one way or another. One of which, going along with this interpretation, this reminded me a lot of Boyhood. In that, especially in the first half, because unlike Boyhood, where due to the nature of it being kind of a experiment of documenting a kid's life over 12 years. It
took 12 years.
It took 12 years to make. That's the meme. And so with Boyhood, you know, there wasn't really that kind of anticipation that it would really explode into something bigger, at least for me. Like, when I watched that movie, it became pretty clear that the jumps in time that like if there was any sort of like narrative or themes to be found, it would be within sort of each year, perhaps. Whereas this movie shares a lot of that similar sort of like perspective of childhood observation. But there's more. There's obviously more that this is building up to. And I think that if I wanted to point to a scene that illustrates the difference really well and also encapsulates what works quite well about this movie, as well as I think where it might start to lose me a little bit, is Sean, in our pre-discussion, you had pointed out a really great scene very early on when the dad is pulling his car into their narrow little like garage building, and he like it's just an extremely long scene of him like trying to straighten out his car and not quite getting it, and like bumping his mirror against the wall and like not having enough room to park it, and it just keeps going, and like we haven't seen the dad up until this point, and it really does a good job of building that tension, especially since we don't have any source of like conflict or drama really in the movie at this point. Like it hasn't showed its hand as to what it could be about. And so I mean, I guess if you want to like keep explaining, like this scene does a really good job of establishing a subtle kind of tension nonetheless.
Yeah, it's just a continuous long shot of the dad pulling into the car, and like it's a huge focus on the front grille of the car, and it's probably like a minute and a half of just him pulling in and then bumping the side of the garage and then running over dog poop and then bumping the other side and turning the mirror in. And like, to anyone who's watched movies, like this is, your stomach is in knots. Any sort of long shot from like down low, it really confers a position of power for the father. And so like, you're like, oh my God. So here's our main antagonist, here is the driving force of the rest of the movie. And like, you get like, in your mind, you're already formulating like these ideas of abuse that the father will bring to the family, or, other terrible things that are going to happen. And it just kind of fizzles. It's well done. Like, it's clear. Once again, everything I say, like when I'm just like, it just fizzles. It's intentional. It's not like and it just fizzles because the director's bad. Like, it's 100% like an increase in tension to release, and that's the purpose.
Yeah, because it even sustains it for a little bit when the dad goes in and he greets the kids and he talks to the mom, and then like they're having the argument in the bedroom that you don't really see, but you hear him over saying like, these damn maids like never clean up all this dog shit that's around, and like kind of after the tension has started to die down, like gives you another little peek of like, oh, maybe this is still our main antagonist. But after that, pretty much he disappears from the movie, and his absence more than anything is what drives that particular plot line with the family.
And the missing masculine figure is a theme for the entire movie.
Right. And so, I think it works really well. And I think that from scene to scene, both in the more implicit, like looming man of the house, like scariness, potential for abuse sort of way that like it's working in this scene, as well as, the marching bands going back and forth down the street, the casual conversation that the kid has at the table where he's like, oh man, like Timmy got shot in the head like on his way to school the other day, and like just this
the casual way this constant like internal struggle in Mexico is referred to in the movie is just wonderful. Like, it's so subtle. It's never like explicitly there. It's just a constant looming well, it's not for most of it. But like, it's just a constant looming specter in the background. And even when it's there, it's pretty not there as far as like what they could actually get into with it. It's very much a very short payoff to it.
And so one thing that I really like about this movie is that it stays away from tropes. Like, so, as fairly savvy moviegoers, like you said, I was preparing myself for like the shitty dad who was shitty in a different way that I wasn't expecting, but like I was expecting him to be like angry and abusing the maids and have a real like stiff upper lip, like being like upper class, middle class, or whatever. That didn't happen. I was expecting, little, the little kids at the table talking about a classmate getting shot in the head. There's all this state violence and unrest and protesting going on in the background. Surely, like, it's gonna encroach in on their peaceful family lives. Doesn't quite happen in that way. Like none of the kids end up dying in this immediate family. And so the ways that the movie finally pay off of on this tension are really great. But if I had to say, like, if I had to try and put my finger on what the thing was that maybe made me bored sometimes, it was those moments where I remember I made this complaint about Hereditary, actually. And I think it's when, like, there's that tension, that very obvious subtle tension, but it has been so long since kind of without a payoff to that I stopped feeling it. And for this movie, I think that I definitely it threw me enough bones to not make me feel like completely disinterested from what was going on, like when the and like very human, very subtle ways too, like when the older son is like leaning against the door, like trying to hear his mom talking about how his dad's never coming back, and she like gets really mad and like smacks him, and is like it's this big horrible thing. Like in another movie, you can imagine the that being this melodramatic sort of moment, but the way that it plays out, just because of how distant everything is, it just sort of like the camera's focused on the characters, but it happens so far away. It feels very underplayed, but it is still a build up, a release in tension, and only on rare occasions, like when the kids are fighting and one of them lobs I didn't even get a good look at what it was, but he lobs like some like projectile at his brother and breaks the window, and like
some like rock looking thing. I couldn't figure out what it was either.
Yeah. And so like that's one of the moments where like the movie cuts in on the window for more of a close up, I think, and like that really like emphasizes it. Like, oh man, like you could have really hurt him. And so, but there were definitely other times where like I felt like particularly when like Cleos like started, like I was waiting for a more emotional like outburst from Cleo at some point, because it's sort of like built up, and when we finally get it,
oh yeah, she's pretty subdued for a vast majority of the movie.
And when we finally get it, it's some extremely powerful stuff. But like at first, I found myself sort of like just wishing something would happen, that it would develop at that point.
Yeah, no, I definitely see what you're saying, because a lot of times I'm just kind of like practically begging someone to do something. But like I once again, like I feel like that is 100% intentional, because it does really play into the banality of, everything happening. Like the whole city is a powder keg. Their lives are a powder keg. Everything is a powder keg, and like we're all waiting for that spark. And like when it just keeps not coming, it's easy to kind of lose some of the interest in it, especially when you'd spend then time watching a slow pan down a busy street or something like that. It kind of loses the desire to see this spark go off. Which is a weird thing to say, because like these feel like very real people. Like you don't really want to see this spark go off, but you do, just from a visual media standpoint.
Yeah, it's like you're looking for the conflict. Like this is like I generally like I've been accused of not getting the appeal of like slice of life shows and stuff of that matter of that nature. And I think that's fair. I think in general, like I'm the kind of guy who likes a quick moving plot with lots of cause and effect and characters sort of taking direct action. Not to say that I don't enjoy like slower paced shows or movies. I can think of several that would be among my favorites, like Alien, of course, being among them. But that's definitely a hell of a tricky balance, especially like you use the word powder keg to refer to the like political situation. And I think that that describes the movie as well, is that like you have the slow burn until you get that explosive payoff. And that's such a tricky line to ride, because if the payoff isn't sufficiently exciting, horrifying, heartbreaking, whatever like emotion you're going for, like it can fall flat. But you know, say what I will about like some of the slower spots in the beginning where I found myself like sort of like nodding off, this movie comes together in an absolutely brilliant way. And I think that the key is that it does, you know, we're talking about like waiting for something to happen, but when we finally get it and it all happens at once, when the protesters end up getting shot, and the next time that Cleo sees her baby's, you know, desolate shitbrain father who abandoned her, is when he's holding a gun, like joining the like secret police, like gunning down or helping to gun down protesters, and then her water breaks. You could easily see how that could be played in such a like over the top melodramatic fashion, but partly because like we've been feeling this tension for this kind of violence build up over the course of the movie, and also that when we do see someone get shot, when we do see someone get straight up like murdered, it is again pulled back. We don't get like the splashing of blood. Like it's a lot more. It's almost like you're watching news footage. Like someone, you've stumbled across a video of like someone getting shot on the internet or something, and it's so pulled back and distant, and all the more chilling because of that, because of how dehumanizing and pulled back this sort of violence is. And so that starts our chain of events leading to the process of Cleo actually giving birth. And
yeah, I'm going to jump in here for a hot second, just because I want to talk about her giving birth, just as how it really ties in literally everything we've seen up to this point. And like more so than anything, more than from like a thematic point, from a visual storytelling point of view, where it's very much taking all of the slow burn elements and combining them in ways that make you forget you're watching a movie. Like, I feel like arguably the full climax is taken care of in a single shot. Like the build up, this whole scene with Fermine, her boyfriend, coming in, pointing the gun at her, them getting into the car to go to the hospital, all of this is not, I would say, not even part of the climax. I would argue that the entirety of the climax takes place in the delivery room over the course of like a 5-minute long shot. And it's just, this scene is so incredibly well done, because it starts off with like a very slow burn, like she's getting put into the straps and everything, and like it feels frenetic, but at the same time like it's entirely deliberate. You watch every action happen, you see it all happening, you hear it, you feel it, and then it picks up pace midway through with the baby turning out to be born already deceased. Like the child, it was a stillbirth, and it kind of picks up pace around that time for a couple of seconds, where like it all feels really frenetic, and then it slows down again as you watch them wrap the baby in the background, and like it just, once again, you see every deliberate action. And I remember about halfway through the scene, I realized that they hadn't cut at all. And like, it felt like a scene that should have had multiple cuts, multiple shifts in perspectives, multiple, like so much had happened, so much had gone on over this course of this scene. It's immaculate, and it plays into everything that the movie has set up to this point thematically, but like, even beyond that, just visually, because you are expecting long, slow scenes. And so when things get exciting, like, you feel like it's a totally different part of something else. Like, it felt like it was cut out from a totally different spot and not a continuation of just this long, slow scene. And it's incredible.
And I think that what you're talking about here is just such a good example of why Alfonso Cuarón really deserves like all these like best directing chops, and what makes him such a good director that's in all of his movies that I've seen is that he will constantly
Prisoner of Azkaban.
We'll constantly do these interesting, unique, like really tough to pull off, like oneers, like these long takes that like Children of Men has a very famous one, a sequence that again has a very similar effect of it's kind of one long take, and the action is very frenetic but very deliberate, but you're just so entranced by what's going on, and so in the moment that you don't even notice that there aren't any cuts. And this is, again, I haven't seen Gravity, but based on what people have told me about Gravity, this is also why that movie is such a thrill consistently, despite being, kind of a simple story. And with this scene, I think that what makes him stand out as a director is that you can never accuse him of doing these tricky camera things just to be fancy. Like, so another movie that I haven't seen but I've heard kind of the discourse about was one that came up earlier. Birdman used a similar technique to make it look like it was all done in one kind of long take. I've not seen Birdman, obviously, so I cannot attest to whether these criticisms of it are true or not. But for people who didn't like that movie, one of the refrains had been that it felt like the director was just kind of showing off, that making it appear to be one long take didn't add that much to the movie or the themes or the story. And so again, whether or not that's true, I think you could say that about a lot of movies that try these sort of like camera tricks. But with this movie, with this really like pulse pounding, super intense, super emotionally devastating like stillbirth scene, is that the fact that the way that it uses the like depth of field and like where the baby is at any given moment, so we get, it's just completely heartbreaking. Like, they'd already mentioned that like they couldn't hear its heartbeat and that like it wasn't moving, so like it's not like it's graphic, but you see them pull out the body like really close to the camera, and it just like flops out and it's not moving, and it's this really, really like haunting, disturbing image. But then it doesn't end there. Like, the fact that, okay, we're in this situation, this is an emergency, we're gonna try and resuscitate her, so we're just gonna pull her off on this gurney, like in the background, like still in view, where Cleo can still see it happening. And so,
oh man, it's multiple rounds of resuscitation too. Like, it's not just like one and done. Like, you sit there to have them resuscitate like two or three attempts.
And I think that like the secret to this movie's success is that is the banality. And because when we finally do get the payoff, the explosive payoff, which is, the previous scene of the secret police with Vermeer, and then with this birthing scene, it is not shot in a way to make the viewer think that this is something that happens only in movies. It's not like, this is probably going to be like among the greatest traumas of this character's life, of having to sit there and watch her dead baby.
Oh my God, yeah. This like raised questions in my mind. Like, how do you handle this?
And
it didn't feel like just like a thing in a movie. Like it forced me to like reconcile with my own understanding on how I would react in a similar situation.
And the movie plays both this and the violence off, like by being so pulled back, by not like just letting the camera roll on sort of these traumas. Like it makes them, despite being narratively speaking like a spike of intensity, they're just another thing happening in kind of a mundane life. Like there are poor like women who have to go through this every single day of like having to give birth to a stillborn baby, and like the fact that the movie doesn't lean into the melodrama and really like lets reality be what it is what makes it so gutting to watch, and what makes this particular choice to do it all in one take. Like it really emphasizes that sort of the distance, the cold unfeelingness of reality, like just having to sit there and watch as doctors do their thing in the background because they've, this is, like the third like stillborn child this week they've had to try this on, and they're completely numb to it by this point. It's brutal. It's a hell of a payoff, and really, just absolutely what makes the movie like come together. Like any doubt that I had about the movie earlier about how I felt with it was just like completely. It made me feel like I was watching a masterpiece, and just seeing all these little bits come together in such a like powerful, horrific way.
Yeah, it's the slow burn really has some just incredible powder keg payoffs. It just like this scene is incredibly rough. The scene shortly after where she throws herself into the waves to try and sacrifice the children, also seeming to be one shot. I don't know if it actually is, but it seems like it's one complete shot, which is really rough to watch as well, watching her struggle in the water. Like, you have an expectation that most of these scenes are going to be, like, extended long shots. And, like, it really just emphasizes the tension when we get to the big moments and they are just more of a long shot. Like, it doesn't feel any quicker like most payoffs do, where it ramps up intensity and everything feels like it moves faster. It almost feels like it slows down even more because you're just watching it and it just keeps going on.
I this is, at least in recent memory, this is like one of the strongest portrayals of the banality of death that I've seen. That it isn't something that is remarkable, that even though it changes people and it changes like it's
no I just realized we were talking about fucking Danganronpa last week, which is the antithesis to what we are saying in every way.
Oh God, you're so right. Yeah, it's a hell of a contrast. In that, Danganronpa last week, you have a man getting pummeled to death by baseballs at 1,000 miles per hour, and it's over the top and amazing. And here you have, like, they don't even die, but just watching the waves, like, crash over the camera and, like, pull the children out, the slow, like, realization that they're getting caught up in the riptide, and Cleo's like she slowly picks up her pace to like run out to the beach. Like that's how people drown. That's how it goes. It's terrifying, but it also isn't remarkable, and that's what makes it so terrifying, and the movie captures that really well. But then still, it's not like the movie, even so, like, she does save the children and gets the catharsis of like finally just saying what she wanted to, like, all along, like really like allowing herself to both feel the grief of the trauma of giving birth to this stillborn child, but also weirdly being kind of relieved that she didn't want her in the first place, and has her own like role and is part of the family in her own way, and the fact that it sort of ends with her smiling and like ascending with the plane going overhead. I mean, it's beautiful stuff. It's you have the banality of sadness, you have the banality of trauma, but you also have the banality of like reconciliation and catharsis and moving forward, and it's some great shit. The ending of this movie is fucking great.
Yeah, no, it really is. I this is gonna be a total 180 from what you were talking about, but like as you were talking about, like I just keep, as this conversation goes on, I keep kind of recounting scenes in my head and thinking about, you know, like what they did, what they performed, like how they looked, and as I said, this is going to be a complete 180, but I had never seen a chicken go down steps before, and it was kind of a wild sight.
A chicken going down steps and two turkeys fucking in the same shot.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, it's in the foreground there. It's kind of hard to see, but that's definitely another bird under that bird. They are definitely copulating.
Yeah, no, I said, I noticed the chicken hopping down the steps, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cute. I like watching them hop down the steps. It's adorable.
I gotta say, I'm terrified of birds, so that scene, like, that's my, like, ironic punishment. Like, if I went to hell, that's where they would put me. Like, they would slam the door behind me, and there would be two.
You gotta remember that for our Danganronpa 2 stream.
I know, I gotta work that in. I'd be forced to watch two turkeys copulate while a bunch of chickens, like, bob up and down and hop down the steps next to me. Yeah, I was not supposed to be chilled to the bone during that scene, but because I am who I am, I was.
Oh, the true horror of the movie.
You know, state-sponsored violence, the trauma of stillbirth. Fuck that. It's those birds. Get them out of here.
Yeah, you know, the lingering war that's like clearly shown in every shot, the rising tide of everything coming into this family as the children drown under the weight of their own, like, being. Fuck that. Man, there was a couple chickens in one scene. Kind of freaked me out. Gave me the heebie-jeebies. So where I'm at, how you doing?
Unironically, every time I see a chicken in a movie, I just think to myself, God, I could never be an actor, because there's like chickens in like rural like movies that take place in rural places all the time, and I just have to be around them, and it would birds.
This podcast ends in weird places every goddamn time.
I feel good about getting that off my chest. We're learning and growing as people.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know if have I mentioned my crippling phobia of birds on the podcast before?
You have not, and I hope you don't come to regret it.
You know what? What will happen will happen.
See, at least you're not on Twitter anymore, so I can't tell people to send you pictures of chickens.
Oh, they'll do it anyway. They'll find a way.
Do you have anything you want to say else about Roma before we wrap it up?
You should watch it if you haven't. Give it a chance. I know it seems like, even if it's slow and we just spoiled it, like you might learn something new about yourself and each other.
The real Roma were the friends we made along the way. Echoing Jackson, like it's worth watching. I think it's interesting. If you know you're gonna fall asleep through it, I guess put it on before going to bed. I don't know. Like, I think it's worth experiencing at least a little bit of it, just to kind of get a taste for why it did win Best Director. It's definitely worth at least taking a look at, if not the whole thing.
I have another nice thing to say. Related to that. Alfonso Cuarón, I don't know much about him. I haven't read too many interviews, but just looking at his body of work, he seems like a very cool guy, and that he's clearly got these like broader ambitions and like art house sensibilities, but he runs the gamut from like this movie being more on the artsy side, and like he directed Prisoner of Azkaban, and also like Gravity is just like a straightforward space thriller, and Children of Men is like a war movie with also like a high concept sci-fi thing. So if you're not sure if you're gonna enjoy this movie, maybe watch one of his other more crowd pleasery movies first. I think they will help you appreciate like what his strengths as a director are, and kind of help you ease into the more I don't want to say esoteric, because it's not esoteric, and that's one of the things that's great about the movie, but more mundane material perhaps, after instead of kind of the high concept like surviving in outer space / protecting the last naturally born child in a dystopian society sort of thing.
And watch Alien. Like, you should watch Alien as well. Like, I realize that's like a total side shoot, but like I feel like if along with Jackson like saying like you should look into like what else Alfonso Cuarón has done, you should watch Alien. And if you can make it through like the first chunk of change of the movie, when it's a much more slow, deliberate burn, you're gonna appreciate this a little bit more for it.
I gotta say, I think I do want to rewatch. I should come back to this movie and rewatch it eventually, because with these slow burn movies, like this is the kind of movie that keeps on giving. That when you come back to it, knowing what the payoff is, and like sort of seeing the whole picture, that I feel like some of those component pieces that I thought maybe were slow, like might kind of be recontextualized, or I find something interesting and new to them. So don't if you think of yourself as someone who isn't as into slow stuff, I'm not sitting here trying to preach to you, tell you you're like a dumb or anything, because I put myself in that camp. Like I said, I generally my philosophy, not just as a critic but as a writer, is that have something that's sort of moving the characters, the themes forward in every scene. But learning to appreciate the slower stuff, I think it's a real valuable experience to have, regardless of if you're just a viewer or if you're a creative yourself. So that's
go see 2001 in theaters if you can too. I'm just recommending other movies at this point, just because like I agree that like you shouldn't be like watch slow movies, because like they're not for everybody. There's definitely some taste behind these slower movies, but like I feel like 2001 in theaters is an experience that if you are a cinephile of any sort, you should definitely check out. It is magnificent. Alien is another one of those that begins with a very slow burn that's well worth seeking out, and like it's kind of like a build up to something like Roma, where like I feel like you can't just sit down and be like, I'm gonna watch Roma today. It's a popcorn movie on a Saturday or something like that. Like you have to kind of build your filmography and kind of be aware of what you're getting into.
Yeah, you have to be in the right mindset, which I guess it's weird that it's cool that Netflix released this movie, but this definitely doesn't fit with the Netflix model, which is, hey, here's a thing I can put on while I fold my laundry. Roma is definitely not that.
Oh yeah, that's not a great idea on this one. With that said, though, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can also find my website, isortof.com. I post some stuff that I've been working on there, though it's been pretty dead recently. We'll see if that gets updated more. I have some projects in the works. And I also stream every, all the fucking time. So you should come hang out with streams and, party with us. We play Jackbox every other Sunday. So, you can come play Jackbox with us. It's always a good time. Jackson's sometimes there if you want a more direct way to yell at him.
Or send me birds.
Or send me birds. Jackson wants his boards.
And I'm Jackson Keller. I'm a mad lad because here's what's happening. I'm just gonna tell y'all on the internet right now. So I am in a graduate program And I've been hinting the past like couple of months now that I've had a big project in the works, and I guess, you know, I want to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about it now, because it's perhaps appropriate that I spent a lot of time talking about like the writing process and being like a creative writer on this particular episode, because that's what I have cooking up. It's a podcast, but it's more like a weekly audiobook than what we're doing here. And so I've hit some setbacks, and one of the other rubs is that the script for said podcast is also my graduate thesis. A graduate thesis which is due in April, and which I have very little of now. So here's my declaration to the world. I am going to write like 100 some odd pages worth of this podcast to bring to you for your listening pleasure over the course of like 1 week, so I can then spend the rest of my school time editing it, because I fucked up and my life came tumbling down, and I didn't have anything to show for it. So this is my challenge. I have spring break next week because I'm still in school technically. So I'm gonna embody the dictionary definition of a mad lad, and I'm going to write basically an entire novel's worth of podcast episodes next week. So I'll give you an update on how that's going, because I obviously have to take a break to crest my head above the water to talk about Alita for a bit. So.
And if you want to wish Jackson the best of luck, you can do so at BADHcast on Twitter, because he's not on Twitter, so I funnel him information that we get from that. So like just tweet pictures of birds with saying like good luck on it and stuff like that. As always, thanks loads to Highway for use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. They're on Spotify, all that good stuff. Go give them a listen. They're great. And also shout out to 25yearslatersite.com for hosting our podcast. We put some interesting episodes on there, and they haven't taken us down yet. So, I mean, that's something. As I said, next week we're going to be talking about Alita, which is way more in our wheelhouse. I like having like these more meaningful discussions of art house films like Black Klansman and stuff like that. But it's been too long since we had an episode that was mostly jokes and weird stuff, which is probably what next week is going to be. So brace yourself for that. Anything else, Jackson?
God help me.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go